Okay, it's 1:30, so we'll get started. I know people will probably still be joining. Aaron, I believe, is double booked, so he'll be popping in here and there throughout the meeting. But thank you for joining us for our September LEA data meeting. Today we're going to be starting a little different. We have the first hour dedicated to a training for incident data entry. So we will go ahead and start with that item. And if we end early, depending on what time, we can take a small break or just move on to the next items on the agenda. So again, our first item will be entering your incident data in Utrecht, and I believe Malia will be presenting on that. Malia, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. This just came from another school for their record.
Hello.
Sorry,
Oh,
Malia from USBE.
oh, sorry. This is oh, sorry.
We might need to give her just a second. We are still right at the beginning of the meeting time.
Hey, Callista, I think her mic was still connecting when you said, "Are you there?" And I see now her audio is connected, so you might want to just ask again.
Oh, thank you. Malia from USBE, are you with us on the meeting?
Yeah, don't we usually give people a few minutes to show up?
Yeah, we can wait a little longer. We just got started right on time, so we can do that. Yeah, we can wait till about 1:35 and see if people keep joining.
Can you go back to the agenda slide so we can make sure people are clear on that this first hour is different than the rest of the meeting? So if, for anyone who didn't quite catch it in the email when we sent it out about this month's meeting, we're doing something a little different, starting out with some comprehensive training on incident data. There was a webinar last week about incident reporting requirements, and the follow-up to that was training on how to enter incident data into Utrecht and how to review it in Utrecht. And we thought it would be most effective to do that training as part of this meeting, since a lot of the folks that join this meeting are involved in that process anyway. So
I tried to join that meeting last week and I must have called 10 different people at the state and nobody knew anything about a Utrex meeting going on. And it was kind of frustrating because I'm like, there wasn't a link sent out with when I registered to attend. And so I was trying to track that down. So I missed all that information. Can you do just kind of a quick rundown of what happened?
Let's see, is Willie or
I'm here.
yeah, would you be able to provide information about where to view the slides from last week, and is there an email list to get on for future webinars?
As for the information presented last week, when we start going over this incident data comprehensive training in this first hour, the last third of the slides are fairly similar. So you'll get some of that information. As for the recording and accessing it in the future, let me talk with, I believe, Shalise or Chantel Coda, and I will make sure to have them send it to the appropriate LEAs. Does that answer your question, Mark? I think it was Mark.
Sorry, I got to take it off mute. Sorry, it doesn't work when I talk and there's. I guess I just. I've been out of the school system for about 5 years, and the state just loves to change the name of everything. Every time I come back, there's some new program or something, and so I'm just trying to play catch up at this point as a assistant director for a charter school, and make sure that I've covered all my bases. So I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything that I'm required to report or do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Christy, yes, it was recorded, and oh, is that the link? Let's see. I don't think that link has the webinars that were discussed last week. So I will try and talk with Shalise Oldroyd. She's usually the one that definitely knows everything about that. And I'll try to get y'all ASAP. But thank you, Logan, for posting that.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started with this training. So this is, again, like I said, about entering your incident data, getting it into Utrex, and then reviewing it once it's into Utrex. Is designed to hopefully be accessible for people who are entirely new to this process, as well as be a review for people who've done this before. Next slide, please. Some acronyms that I'll use in this training. We have USBE, Utah State Board of Education. LEA is the local education agency. So that's your district level, or that's the charter level where there might be more than one school within a charter. SSID, statewide student ID. SIS is the student information system. Some of the most frequently used ones are listed here, although there are a few others. Utrex stands for Utah Transcript Record Exchange, and that's simply the name of Utah's system for collecting student data from schools. Within Utrex, when you submit data from your SIS to Utrex, it gets submitted as a collection of different records. The S1 record is one that I'll reference. That is the Utrex name for the student enrollment information. The I1 record is the Utrex name for the incident record, which is the information about the incident that's common to all students involved in the incident. There should be one I1 record per incident. The I2 record is the Utrex name for the incident association record. That's the information about individual student involvement in the incident. And there should be one I2 record per student involved in the incident. So it's not uncommon to have more than one I2 record for a single I1 record. Next slide, please. Okay, so for submitting data, I think it makes it easiest to think of it as a 3-step process and just worry about one step at a time rather than getting overwhelmed about the whole thing all at once. So first step is entering the incident data into your SIS. The next step is submitting that data to UTrex and then reviewing any validation errors that happened during the submission. And then finally is going into the UTrex report and reviewing those to verify the accuracy of the data that got into UTrex. Next slide. So step 1, entering incident data into your SIS. So when you enter incident data into your SIS, what you're entering and what it looks like, it might be different in each SIS. So for that part of it, entering the data into your SIS, your helpful resources are going to be the SIS help resources, training resources, and user groups. Now, even though there's differences between UTrex and SIS systems, the UTrex specifications can be helpful for reviewing to help you with figuring out what to enter into your SIS. So this is the link for the UTrex specifications. And I think it's good to just bookmark it because it's buried kind of deep on the USBE website, not always easy to find. Although we did experiment with some Googling some terms to see if it would bring you to the UTrex specs. And these terms, UTrex USBE or UTrex Utah, seem to be effective at getting to the UTrex specifications. Okay, so UTrex versus SIS, just a little more about the differences. So most LEAs use one of the following SIS systems: Aspire, Compass, Infinite Campus, PowerSchool, or Skyward. Each SIS has unique design and functionality features that appeal to the LEA. So the way LEAs enter data into the SIS will vary according to the design of that SIS. And then, so again, like I said, your SIS help desk, training resources, and user groups should be the first line of assistance for finding out how to enter data into your SIS system. Willie, could you help me out and put the link to the UTrex specifications in the chat? Oh, she did. Click on it. Great, thank you. Okay, and then more on the differences. So UTrex is the state system for collecting data from all of the different SIS systems and organizing it into one state database. SIS systems must be able to transform and submit data to UTrex so that the data matches UTrex specifications. How the data is entered into your SIS system might be different than it is in the UTrex specifications, but despite the differences, the UTrex specifications can often be a helpful resource for entering data into your SIS. The UTrex specs is a really big document, and it may seem intimidating at first. So I'm going to give you some instructions to help you skip to the information you need and make the document more user-friendly. First, from the table of contents, control-click on the record that you're interested in learning more about. In this case, the incident record or the incident association record. Next slide, please. And once you get to the first page for that record, it's going to start on the introduction page, but each record follows the same layout. So first you have the introduction, then you have something called SIF mapping, then you have detailed field descriptions, and then you have a section on validation errors. And as you go through the specifications, any recent changes to the file should be easy to identify. They should be in bold red text. And this screenshot here shows an example of a recent update to the introduction section for the incident record, where we added the information from recent legislation that information about victims of bullying now has to be reported. The introduction section is introductory information about the record, information about what must be submitted, who to contact for help. The SIF mapping section. SIF stands for Schools Interoperability Framework. SIF is not a product, but an industry initiative that enables diverse applications to interact and share data. SIF mapping is the information that your SIS programmers need in order to set up submissions from your SIS to UTREX. Most of you using this UTREX specification document or people entering incident data outside of SIS programmers can just ignore this whole section. You'll skip to the detailed field description section. This is the main section you should focus on. It gives you the name and description of each data item. It's written in plain language as much as possible. It has code tables with descriptions, if applicable. It includes information on whether or not the field is required, or in some cases, conditionally required. And it includes information on if or how the field relates to other fields. And then often you'll find notes. These might include rules for using certain codes, tips for what to do in certain situations, etc. Kind of think of it as like a frequently asked questions document. Here's an example of a detailed field description. This is from the incident record, and it's the gang-related field. So this is a required field, and you have to indicate if the incident is gang-related. The codes that are allowed for this field are Y, which means yes, it's gang-related, or N, which means no, it's not gang-related. The final section is the validation errors section. What are validation errors? They are rules that apply to the data you're submitting. For example, if it's a required field, there's a rule that the field can't be submitted with a blank. A lot of fields are limited to a certain set of valid values. And sometimes there's dependencies where one field depends on another. So for example, if a discipline type is reported, then the number of days field can't be blank. And here's an example from the validation errors section for the incident association record. So for the first row there, you'll see that this validation has to do with the number of days field and the discipline method field. The rule is that number of days can't be blank or 0 if discipline method is present. The ID for this validation is the I2.1103. Level error means that it's a fatal validation error. And those first 5 columns are going to be mostly what you need. The last 2 columns actually kind of just repeat the same rule, but it uses a little more technical jargon. The second row in this example is again pertaining to the number of days field in the I2 record. And if it's present, the rule is that it must be numeric and it has to be less than or equal to 180. And the final row, the third validation on the number of days field in the I2 record is that you must submit the value in increments of 0.1. So for example, if you submitted that the student was disciplined for 0.11 days, it would trigger this error. You would just need to round that down and report it as 0.1 days. Some tips for the validation section. A lot of times when you're looking at the validation errors report, sometimes it's easiest to first see what error ID you're getting, and then open up the specifications, do a Control F to do a search and find, put in the error ID, and then it'll bring you right to the specifications where it gives you the rule and more information about the validation. If the validation has a dependency, you'll see more than one field name listed, like there was in this example. Validations, the number, the error ID for the validation starts with the record. So you could have 001 validations on the I1 record, on the I2 record, and both of them, basically the same error is used for different fields in different records. And then a validation level of ERR means it's a fatal error, the record will be blocked, and the validation level of warning means that the record's not going to get blocked from getting submitted to UTREX. And then the rule column states the reason for the validation in plain language. Okay, so step one in summary is to enter data into your SIS, and I've gone over the resources that are available to help you with entering incident data, including the UTREX specifications. Additionally, you're always welcome to reach out to USDE staff for additional assistance, in particular for incident data. You'll want to reach out to Data and Statistics Help or to the prevention team. Step two, your LEA submits data to UTREX and you review it and or fix I1 and I2 validation errors. So LEA should have daily automatic submissions set up to UTREX. And if that's the case, then any daily updates you make to data in your SIS will be reflected in UTREX after the submission has completed processing. And this includes data in UTREX reports and data in the Data Gateway student lookup. After you submit, you're going to need to look for fatal validation errors that need to be fixed, and you're going to need to review any validation warnings to see if anything needs to be fixed. This is a screenshot of the UTREX overview page, and this is where you'll look to see if your latest submission went through okay and to see if you have any validation errors. You can download a file that just gives you the level 1 errors, a file that just gives you the level 2 errors, and you can also download the validation errors report linked in the upper right-hand corner, which just gives you all of your level 1 and level 2 validations in one report. Depending on your data gateway role, you might not be able to see this screen or download the validation warnings, and in which case just contact your data gateway LEA admin to see if you should get access to this or to have them check to see if there are any validation errors or warnings that you should review. What's the difference between level 1 and level 2 validation? Level 1 are warnings and errors due to problems in the incident or incident association record itself. If you have any, they'll be listed on a tab that is titled either incident or incident association. Level 2 warnings and errors are due to conflicting data from another LEA or from a previous year's data. There are no level 2 validations on incident data. However, if a student's enrollment record, the F1 record, has a level 2 error, then all of the student's data, including the incident data, will be blocked from getting into UTREX. Here is an example of some level 1 validations on the incident association record. All of these are warnings on some of the new fields that we have, and they were left blank. These are required fields, so they should be reported with either a Y or an N, which are the valid values for these fields. These fields being new, when we have new fields, we don't set up fatal errors to trigger as fatal at first. We wait until we can verify that all SIS systems are able to submit data in the new field. And only then would we change it to a fatal error. And if there are any new validations like this that are about to be changed from a warning to a fatal error, you'll receive information about that in these monthly LEA data meetings. What happens to data with a validation error? Well, if it's a fatal error, that means the record's going to be blocked from UTREX. And this impacts your incident reporting compliance, so you have to fix it. Warning, your data will still get into UTREX. The purpose of the warning is to let you know that there might be a problem with the data. You just need to review it, verify that it's correct, or if it's incorrect. And if it's correct, you can ignore the warning. If it's incorrect, fix it. Or in some cases, you might be getting a warning now, but it'll go fatal later. So you want to fix those to avoid fatals later. So step 2, in summary, your LEA should be submitting to UTREX daily. You'll want to go in and download and review the validations, fix any missing or incorrect incident data, and then after your next submission, check to see if the validation error has gone away. If you need help with incident data validations, contact Data Statistics Help. Step 3, you go into UTREX reports and verify that the data that's gotten to UTREX is correct. For accessing the data gateway, there's the 2 best ways are either from the USBE homepage, scroll down and click on the data gateway link, or you can type in the direct URL for the data gateway, which is datagateway.schools.utah.gov. Once you're on the data gateway landing page, you'll see a login link in the upper right-hand corner. If you don't have a login account yet, you'll want to contact your Data Gateway LEA admin to work on getting set up with an account and appropriate roles. Right now, there are a couple roles that have access to the discipline data reports. Your LEA might also create a custom role to access those reports. More about those roles. So currently the 2, what we call default roles in Data Gateway that have access to both discipline reports are the UTREX LEA user and the UTREX restricted LEA user roles. There are also school user version of these 2 roles. The LEA user roles would have access to all the data for all the LEA. The school user role would only have access to the data in the school that they have the role for. In addition to those 2 roles that have access to both discipline reports, there's the special education LEA user and the school user equivalent roles has access to the discipline incident summary for special ed. LEAs can also set up custom roles. So maybe you want someone to be able to access the discipline reports, but not everything that the UTREX LEA user has access to. So you could set up a custom role that just has access to the discipline reports. And again, work with your LEA admin to determine the appropriate role for you. To access the incident reports, once you're logged in, depending on your role and your access, if you see the UTREX drop-down menu, click on that and then click on the reports link. If you're a special ed LEA user, you'll click on the My Tools drop-down menu, and then you'll click on the UTREX Special Education Reports link. On the reports page, under the year-round reports header, these are the 2 reports you're going to want to download and review. The Discipline Incident Summary Report, which includes aggregate counts by school of all incident and discipline data, and the Discipline Incident Summary for Special Ed, which includes student level data. So the Discipline Incident Summary Report is useful for reviewing and verifying accuracy of incident and discipline data totals submitted from your SIS to UTREX. Again, it includes total counts by school of data submitted through the incident record and the incident association record. Some frequently asked questions about that report. A lot of people aren't sure what the difference is between a distinct incident count and student incidents. So a single incident, a distinct incident, can involve multiple students, and a single student can have multiple infractions per incident. Thus, student incident counts may exceed distinct incident counts. Distinct incident counts are basically the count of your I-1 records. Student incident primary infraction count is basically the count of your I-2 record. And then we have in column H, the secondary infraction count. So each student can have only one primary infraction, but they can have between 0 and 4 secondary infractions. Those would be accounted for in column H, and column H is the only column in this file where secondary infractions are counted. Another frequently asked question about this report is about the weapons data. So we have the weapons student infraction type, and then we have the different types of weapons that can get reported. Column AC is the count of the weapons as the primary infraction type. And then the rest of these columns here, AD through AK, are the types of weapons that have been reported. And all weapons are included in weapon reported counts, even if the primary infraction type is not a weapon. So for example, we have a fight where a student used the textbook as a weapon. So in that incident, the primary infraction for that student is going to be fighting. So the weapon student infraction type is 0, but the weapon reported other object is 1 because the textbook was still reported. And one more frequently asked question about this report is with regard to our new data reporting requirements that are required for the new upcoming school disciplinary and law enforcement action report. How can you review these? These are already included in this discipline incident summary report. You'll find in columns AU through AX counts of physical arrest, search and seizure, criminal citation, and non-criminal citation. So if you're not sure if your LEA is submitting this data yet, you can download this report and you can see if these counts are still 0 or if you have greater than 0 in any of these columns. Another field that's being added for the school disciplinary law enforcement action report is retaliation. It was added by legislation later than the other fields, so that's why it's not on the same timing as those other fields. We're still working on getting that field up and running. And so we don't have this data being collected in UTREX yet, and you won't see it yet in the discipline incident summary. But as soon as we do have that data being collected, you're going to be able to find a column in the discipline incident summary report where you can review the counts of retaliation that have been reported. Okay, and then the other report, discipline incident summary for special ed, you would use this report to review and verify accuracy of incident discipline data submitted for students with disabilities. It includes student level data on each incident in which a special ed student was involved and the student was suspended or expelled. So their incidents where they didn't receive a suspension or expulsion aren't going to be included in this report. It also has a sum of the total number of discipline days a student has received statewide. And that's important for your special ed directors to make sure they're in compliance with an IDEA law that requires students with disabilities to be provided with educational services after they've had 10 cumulative days of suspension or expulsion across the state. So it might be 9 days provided by a different LEA. And then when your LEA hits day 11, even though for you it might be only the second day, that's when services are required. And so that's where this report comes in very handy. Your special ed directors can use this report before they discipline a student to make sure that they're able to provide those, identify that the student needs to be provided with those educational services. They can also use this report to track disproportionality, which is another measure that they're required to make sure that they're not disciplining disproportionately based on race or disability. If you need additional training resources for this report, we have them. Just contact me and I'll get those to you. Okay, and one more place to look up incident data is the student lookup in Data Gateway. And for this, you can look at the student level data for a particular student that you're just not sure, did that incident data get reported? So to use that, first open the student lookup. There's actually a few different links to get to the student lookup, and each of them, it has a different name. So apologize for that confusion. Here's a few of them. Under My Tool, it's just called Students. Under the UTREX pull-down menu, it's called Student Search. If you don't see either of these options, work with your Data Gateway LEA admin to either gain access to the tool or to have them help you look up the student. This is what the form looks like. A number of different search fields you can fill in. Usually, if you have the SSID, that's probably going to be your best search field to fill in. If you don't have the SSID, you'll probably want to do a combination of the first name, last name, and date of birth of the student. Or another option is to select your LEA's name and enter your local student number for the student, the district ID. On the results screen, if your search turns up multiple students, you might need to refine the search by adding additional information about the student or the LEA in which they were enrolled. After the results have been narrowed down to one student, you'll see a screen that shows the most recent enrollment details for that student. And you can scroll down and click on the tab labeled Incident Details. It'll expand to show the incident data associated with that enrollment record. You can also click on the menu in the left on the enrollments link. It's a gray box, and then it'll show you, take you to a screen that shows you additional enrollment records that the student has had. And this is a screenshot that shows where that enrollments link is and where the incident details tab is. This is a screenshot of the enrollment list screen. And if you want to see more of the details, including the incident details on any of these particular enrollments, you'll click on the details link to the right of the enrollment. Okay, step 3 in summary. Work with your LEA data admin to gain access to the UTREX discipline report. Again, those are the discipline incident summary report, which is aggregate counts, the discipline incident summary for special ed, which is student level data for students with disabilities who have been suspended or expelled. And then also you can review incident records in UTREX for a particular student by using the student lookup functionality. Okay, so that's the 3-step process for entering and reviewing your incident data in UTREX. This next section is just going to give you a brief overview of state and federal reporting requirements for incident and discipline data. So in accordance with federal and state statutes, a record of incidents involving the following must be reported through UTREX to USPE. Any student act of prohibited behavior resulting in an in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, or expulsion, a placement in an alternative school or alternative learning program, a hearing officer removal, a referral to police court or program, any incident of bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, and retaliation. And this includes for all offenders as well as for all victims. An indication of whether the student was part of a gang prevention program at the type of the incident, an indication of whether the incident was gang related, and any use of emergency safety interventions as outlined in Utah Administrative Rule R277609. A little bit more about reporting on removals. You should be reporting removals of any type, every incident that generates a removal from the student's regular educational setting. This includes in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsion, removal to an alternate setting, and even if the parent comes and takes the student home. So the incident data uses include things like identifying trends and student needs, evaluating resources, informing decision-making on funding and legislation, and data for annual reporting purposes. This includes the superintendent's annual report, the upcoming school disciplinary and law enforcement action report, Utah's annual report on intergenerational poverty, the Office of Civil Rights data collection, EdSAC disciplinary removal data files, IDEA significant disproportionality, and the Office of Special Education Programs annual performance report. And for questions, if you have questions or training requests, please contact Willie Chen. And then for information about that special education discipline data report or the disproportionality or IDEA laws, contact me. And any questions before we move on?
Malia, it looks like there's a question in the chat. It says if an incident was not recorded, can it be put in and backdated?
So UTREX only collects data for 1 year at a time. So it depends. If it's data for the current school year, definitely you can still enter that data and submit it as long as it's in one of the finalized data sets, we'll get that. If it's data from a prior school year, there isn't a way of getting that into UTREX, although if your LEA sees value in entering that retroactively into the SIS, then that's maybe something you might be able to do. I'm not sure on the exact functionality of each SIS. Okay, we're done a little early. Do you think we should wait until 2:30 to start the rest of the meeting, give people a break, or I'm not sure. It's just in case there were people who were going to wait and tune in at 2:30.
Yeah, I was gonna open it up to the group. We can take a break or we can move on. Is Aaron even on right now? I know that he was. Let's see.
I let him know that we finished up early and that we might be taking a break, we might not be, and I haven't heard anything.
Okay, how about we just take a short break? How about 2:20 give Aaron a few minutes, hopefully to be able to join us. Oh, it looks like we have one more question. What are the data sources used for school report cards?
Yeah, that's probably something that Erin would answer anyway. So let's just have that question roll over to after 2:20 when Erin's on.
Okay, sounds good. So I'll put it in the chat if anyone's not listening, but we'll go ahead and plan to just come back in 5 minutes. Unless Erin is still not ready, and then we might have to adjust.
Thanks.
Thank you, Malia. Okay, thank you everyone for waiting and for those that just joined. The first part of the meeting was the training on incident data, which is a new format that we've started today. And so the rest of the meeting will be what was sent out on the agenda. And Aaron will be talking about the first couple items on the agenda. And Aaron, there was a question in the chat, and I think David was able to respond, but just if you want to tell the group, they're asking about the source of data that's used for the school report card.
Can they be a little bit more specific? I'm looking at the chat right now. The data used in the school report card comes mostly from the BU Pass database or things like student enrollment, ACT, etc. Does that answer the question? Or do we know who asked the question?
Yeah, I believe Sarah asked. They're just trying to verify the data.
Okay. It's complicated, but yes, it comes from the information that we receive, obviously, from you guys in the UTREX assessment load that gets transformed into the warehouse. We use that warehouse data load. We use our assessment loads. And then we apply multiple business rules throughout. And the accountability reports are put through. Just sharing, I'm with a number of assessment directors right now, talking about different issues and concerns and how do they verify or come to agreement between different reports and stuff like that. Anyway, with that said, yes, that's the source where it's coming from. If you need additional help in verifying that data, let myself or David Mackey know. We can help point you in that right direction. Where it is all appointed. Thank you. Okay. All right, let's go ahead. If it's okay, let's move on to the next screen. And I'm going to address that question a little bit later. So, compliance with HB 230. This is just a request that each of your systems, your SIS systems, are in compliance. We received a number of concerned phone calls, in particular civil rights violation phone calls that came into the office. We looked at how Aspire SIS was displaying the information. So as someone would go in and register a student for the first time, it said, I think, birth certificate / legal documentation. I think that's what it originally said. And then they just put a check mark that they had received that. With the passing of HB 230 last year, basically what we're saying is it's not just the birth certificate, though we know the majority of the students in Utah will be coming with a birth certificate. So what we did in the Aspire system is just changed it, birth certificate or legal documentation. And then below that, I believe there's a pop-up window or dialogue information that would say what you see on the screen here, certified copy of the student's birth certificate or other supporting legal documentation that may include. Now, this language we took directly out of HB 230 and recommend that you go back and share that with your SIS vendors and have, if not identical, very similar language in there saying basically you can use the religious, hospital, or a physician certified showing that the student's date of birth, entry into the family religious text and adoption record, previously verified school records, previously verified immunization records, documentation from social services, or other legal documentation, including from a consulate that reflects the student's biological age. And so again, that update was put inside of Aspire. I'm not able to follow what's happening in the chat as quick. If someone would just let me know if I need to address something there, I'd appreciate that.
I can let you know if there's any questions relevant to what you're.
Thank you. All right, let's go. So that one's pretty simple. This is just a check to have you guys do that. Okay, the next one, economically disadvantaged requirements for CEP and provision to schools. This only applies.
Aaron,
Yes.
sorry to stop you, but there was a couple questions on the last.
Okay.
Why was this bill introduced? It's the first question.
Introduced or passed? I'll go back to that one. Why what was introduced is, again, this is a civil rights issue that you're not able, we, let's change the words, we cannot require a parent or the student and say, you absolutely have to have a birth certificate, or require some form of information that shows that they are citizens of the United States. That's where the concern started from. And so the concern was, hey, if someone is asking for information beyond what we are legally required to ask, that is a civil rights violation. Make sure that it is understood legal documentation can be more than just the birth certificate. There's a number of things that we can look at. So that's why it was passed, if that makes sense. Again, we're talking about a number of refugee status, asylum seekers and illegal immigrants are concerned that this information might be used to notify the government. Again, schools are being a part of the government of their existence. We're saying, no, that's not what's going on here. Question is, does HB 230 apply to colleges and universities? Great question. I have no idea. I'd have to go back and read the bill. It's a good question. What was the next question?
There was a previous question, how do home birth certificates work?
You would take that as a physician or, someone wrote that information down. And if it's a home birth, typically you still get a birth certificate or a vital statistic record on it. I'm saying typically that's what happens. What we're saying though is be flexible in what you are requiring. The question is, will we require two forms of what is listed, or is one sufficient? One's sufficient. Any other questions on this? So again, we recognize majority of the students registering in Utah, you're going to get a birth certificate. This is just on those additional exceptions as they're coming in, make sure that we're in compliance with civil rights law and with state law on the ability for individuals to present other forms of documentation that are viable, that are official, and we can use them. Okay. That last comment.
Aaron?
Yes.
Sorry, I wasn't typing quick enough, but before you move on, do we have to display that whole list in our SIS, or can we just say birth certificate or other supporting documentation and then, I don't know, maybe have a link to the list, or, I mean.
So the concern is really with the registrars. So go from there. Do you have to display this whole list? No. This is what the law states, that how we have to follow it, and this is how we put it in Aspire SIS.
Yeah.
Does this whole list have to be on the screen, appear, Well, I would have reference and I'd do the training. The issue is when someone has a complaint saying they won't let my student register because we don't have a birth certificate, that's the violation.
Okay.
You're trying to avoid or facilitate those situations where someone would come in and say, well, you need legal documentation. It's not birth certificate only, it's any form. And if someone has a question what those are, that's why we have that list available.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Were you the one who put in that last comment? That was Mark Allen. It looks like that might be something else. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next one. So again, economic disadvantage requirement for CEP and provision to schools. This only applies to those who have CEP or provision schools. For everyone else, there is no change. But basically what it's saying is, this is an update. If your school or district is, again, CEP or provision 2, you cannot submit as default 100% of your students as Y. We actually need the status of each student submitted. This is for Department of Education is requiring that this information be submitted, in particular for the Title I designation, calculations, and such. And the Title I directors, or the Title I directors that have been communicating and receiving this information as well. And I believe there's going to be another meeting in like late November. We'll be talking about the Title I options inside of here. So I hope this is just clear and easy. Is, again, if you have a school that in the past we said submit 100% as Y, that's now changed. You need to submit either, a free, a reduced, or yes, as they are, they qualify as economically disadvantaged, and submit that to us. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out. You can talk to me. You can talk to Tammy Walker in Child Nutrition, or you can also talk with Kimberly Loveland in Child Nutrition on this. Okay. Hopefully that's clear. Thank you. Let's move to the next one. All right, this next one will be fun. This is going to be, I need some volunteers to help me out with this. And I got an email actually this morning stating that they need this sped up a little bit faster than I had requested. I asked for a week, but it looks like I have maybe like 2 days. So next slide, please. Basically what I am doing is I'm reaching out to you guys. And so here's a list of the different SISs that we know of that are up and running today. The Aspire is taken care of because I just reached downstairs and said, hey, Paula, I need this information. But I need someone from Skyward, someone from Power School, someone from Davis, someone from Discovery, someone from Infinite Campus, someone from Severe, Grade Quick, and Compass to help me know how bullying information records are stored in your system. And when a student transfers, it's only one slide. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. My scroll just went.
It's all right. There we go. So item number 1, I need volunteers or voluntold, however we want to approach that, from each of these SIS systems to tell me, how are you storing bullying data? Obviously, it could, that's related to incident data and such, but once you receive that information, if someone can take the notes and say, for example, Stacy, thank you, I can do it for Power School, appreciate that. How is that information shared the next year or not shared the next year? And in particular, if a student transitions like from one school, like elementary, into the middle school or the elementary or the junior high school or or what are the configuration? How is that information shared from year to year? Is it shared or isn't it shared? And the last part of that is who can access that information? Is that the administrator only? Is it the IT team only who can get to it? Is that a teacher level access on request? Is that a parent access? We don't know. Legislation is thinking through this process and are concerned about parental rights, parental concerns, and making sure that there is a mechanism that certain, for example, cases of bullying. So if you want to say in elementary, 2 kids have an issue with bullying, and then they move to a junior high, does that record disappear? And teachers are no longer aware of that. If the parent wants to make sure that information follows along, how could they do that? Or does that already happen and this is a non-starter or something like that? Okay. So Callista,
Yes.
I'm just trying to see, did I get volunteers?
You have Russell from Infinite Campus, Bobby from Skyward, Stacy for Power School.
That's 3.
And then Stephen just made the comment that this might differ from LEA to LEA.
I just need one example. And it's okay. I understood there's multiple varieties. I just need to get a general consensus, general census what's going on. So we don't have someone from Compass, from Great Quick, Severe. Did we get something from Discovery? Someone from Discovery?
No, you have one for Compass.
Okay. John Parsons, are you here? Or someone from Davis?
I don't see John on the call.
We might be reaching out to him directly. Someone from Severe?
I don't see their Utrecht person either.
Okay. And it was Discovery. We don't have Discovery, right?
No.
Okay. So Callista, just homework or someone, again, I apologize, but if you could, maybe not Callista, can someone from my team take those names down, make note and share that
Colby's
with me?
taking notes.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Colby. Okay, next slide, and I think I'm done.
And Aaron, I don't know if you want to address this now or finish with this item, but you did have a couple questions about the free and reduced lunch.
Okay, let's address them now.
It's really the same question from 2 LEAs, but she was saying sometimes parents don't want to fill out income forms. Is there any other way to know whether or not the student is economically disadvantaged? And the other LEA said we only use direct cert to determine. So how else would they identify the student in that case?
You wouldn't. So the methods or the forms, if the parent won't fill out the form, then don't mark them as low income. That's really, you have the direct certification process. You have the application for free reduced lunch process. You have the low income. No, I don't remember the name of it. It's the non-lunch, just the low income form process that you can receive from the students. That's what we have right now. Outside of that, don't mark them.
And then RES, where can we locate the updated forms?
Teaching, CMP has that. So email Tammy Walker. Fee waiver forms, thank you. Those will also work. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So if no one else has any questions on those items, we'll move on to Cliff. And Cliff's going to be talking about some of the newer fields in Utrecht and updates on those. All right, Cliff.
Thank you. Go ahead and move us on to the next slide. So I figured that it would be best to start us off with making sure that everybody knows where to go to get some initial Utrecht information. Utrecht has a public site available. I've got the link here referenced. And from that link, you can get to where, we really talk a lot about in these meetings, and that's the data clearinghouse file specification, which is our most up-to-date link that will take you to that document to give you all of the details to validate any errors that you have. And it's a very one-to-one scenario to where you can just look them up for each one you have a problem with. Go to the next screen. The other key thing to look at on this document is that this is going to go through and show you all of our recent revisions. That's going to let you know all the things which have recently changed that we're drawing attention to. And occasionally there's still things which we bring up in these sort of meetings, which are newer and not quite added to the revisions list yet. So that's, a little bit of inside information when we do bring things out that isn't in that yet. But this is your general go-to to know what's new and what you would like to get your system set up to be able to handle, or how to address any errors that are coming through that maybe used to work fine, but because of a change recently made, that it no longer is. We'll also update when we've corrected things too, to where you can know that something that was previously a problem, we've heard you and made adjustments to take care of that. Go to the next slide. I'd like to get us started off with the early numeracy validations. The validations on new early numeracy fields were set up as warnings. And this is done for some details that I also gave in the chat, that this is an entry level thing at this point, that we are trying to get this up to date with everyone and to get all the LEAs ready for providing this data. At the end of the 2020 school year, we'd received valid values from 88 out of our 125 LEAs that serve grades K through 3. So that was pretty good progress. Since they are warnings, as I'd mentioned, they do not have to be resolved for your October or December finalizing. So don't let that scare you if you're seeing any of those warnings right now. They're not going to prevent your finalizing. They're not going to prevent your funding. They're okay to have right now. We will be making them fatal errors, however. So after the time that we've gotten everything up to speed for all the LEAs and it's working, we're hoping to be able to move this over into the fatal errors where they will be required, as this is again under a legislation to be able to collect and utilize these data points.
Cliff, and could we real quick just ask if there are any LEAs that are still having trouble submitting in their SIS? Because I know what year in Power School was, but does anyone from Power School know if that's been resolved? Okay, so one LEA said that it has been resolved. Okay, that's great to know. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead on to the next screen. So for those who are technical and having to work with this, if you're trying to adjust your specifications to what's needed, here's a screenshot, which is going to be able to give those details. And this is one of those instances of this is data that's a little bit more recent than what we have in the spec yet. as we are still implementing some of these changes out into the system for some of these things to be in place. So again, that is another reason why warnings are a good place to start with. It also gives us time to make sure that we have everything in place before we start requiring it and able to test it with you. Go ahead to the next slide. On our absence fields, we had an issue with the absences due to suspension field, resulting in inaccurate values for some LEAs. These fields are only warnings, and they're currently being held back until we can verify the accuracy of the calculations that are involved with it to make sure that it's usable data, and also to reiterate that the data that we're collecting here is not necessarily something that we're going to jump right onto immediately, but it's more of we're going to use it for analytics, for comparing and looking backwards on things and knowing what's happening over time. So during the duration of time that we don't have this accurate, we're not going to be storing that data. You don't have to worry about if you've got it set and you believe that it's right, or if you believe that it's wrong. We're going to start using that data only when we know that it's ready to go for us. Go ahead to the next slide. Before we move on, let me address some of the areas coming up here. The other error, which is, or I'm sorry, warning, which is most commonly being hit right now, is for the mailing address zip code. And that can be ignored. The idea of ignoring the entire mailing address or the parent guardian requests, those are counterproductive for the state and for the students. So we do encourage and are trying to move everyone into the use of those fields because they enable us to be able to communicate to the parents, to the actual people that get mail at the locations, to be able to assist them with things like their child nutrition program eligibility. And if we don't have that information of who to contact at that address without their mailing address and the parent's name, it slows down our ability to assist students. So I strongly request that we don't ignore them. We just work towards them, knowing that we don't have to have them yet. In cases where the mailing is the same as the physical address, we're not going to be requiring that to be separate. We want that to be in place more of when there is a mailing address that's different, then you'll need to fill that out. So the level of how we're going to be requiring this, it's likely to just get less in this case. It's not going to be worse. It's actually going to be more open to where it becomes fully optional. But that's going to be with the premise that we actually really want it. We actually really benefit from it. But there are instances where it's no different. So we can't really expect that to always be there. And we haven't come up with a better way to understand when to provide a warning or not to provide a warning in this instance. So I'd like to make sure that we move on with that concept in mind, that we do want to provide that data, but it's okay if it doesn't apply for you. Any questions on that before I move on?
There were just a lot of comments in the chat about LEAs getting the zip code warnings and a couple on the parent guardian field.
Yep. And again, these are warnings because we really want that data. That data really helps make a difference for our students here in Utah. And we'd like to see that data come through. We're not going to prevent any funding due to those warnings. But we are, trying to get that for supporting the students.
There was also a question, Cliff, on when will the school year 23 UTREC specifications be finalized?
Well, I'd say that it's more of a living document, and that living document is something that we adjust throughout the year. So finalizing it for the year, we will finalize, what we're going to ask for only up until the time that it currently is, because legislation will change and can change our specification. And sometimes that's something we're given a duration of time to apply, and we could set that up for the next year. But if it's something that is coming down and it's this is hot, we need to make these changes as soon as LEAs can adjust to them, then we kind of share the heat with that situation to try to get those adjustments all the way through for everyone to address the current hot needs with parents, such as with the gender and sex field being changed, getting gender changed over to sex. That's something that has been a hot topic that has clearly made its way all the way through, and will continue to be communicated out for anyone that has questions about that, and referencing their data to no longer use gender, and anything that they potentially get from the state to also not reference as gender, but as sex.
Cliff, so I think the issue that some LEAs are having in their SAS is that the data has been submitted in their SAS, but it's not communicating to UTRECs because they're still getting the warnings.
Okay. So to clarify, we have values in the data, but the warnings are still coming through that it's empty or not accepted. Is that accurate? I think that that's accurate from what I'm hearing. So
That's correct.
so yeah, if anyone would like to shoot me a ticket through Fresh Service or an email with some examples, I'm happy to take a look at that. And while we're working with those validations, we can try to make sure that it's happening the way that it should and we're not over triggering. I do believe that for the zip code, it's in that state of over triggering. It's showing up more often than is needed. But if the rest of the address is not giving any warnings, then we're probably needing to hear about that feedback and get some examples. But we are aware about the mailing zip code needing to be dialed down to not trigger as often.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I put a ticket about this issue before, and I was told that you guys, UTRECs, knew about the Ssid codes errors, and that you guys were supposed to fix them. But what you were saying, like, I just got confused a little bit. So how does that work?
I think that what you said is all accurate, and that we are working on fixing it is the only adjustment to that. Prioritization wise, we have been working with higher impact things to students and the state, and we haven't been able to address that yet. But we will still communicate things such as that here in these meetings to make sure that you're aware of things coming down the pipeline that need to be changed, or as well just to communicate out to where you have that higher level of comfortability that you can, if you know that you're providing the data and that it's, doesn't have any data type errors or something, that it's, the right values, then you're fine. And you'll be fine even when we get things resolved, that those mailing addresses will load, they'll be used and utilized to help the students.
So sorry, Cliff. What about the other error that's giving us parent guardian last name is expected but is blank? I think I went through 80% of my students on that warning list, and they all have a parent name and it's not blank, and I'm still getting the error. So what is triggering that?
That sounds like a similar area that with the zip code, that we need to go through and adjust how we're triggering on that and get that corrected for you. And we can provide out an update for everyone once we've been able to get that correction in place.
But do
Cliff,
we open a ticket for that? Because I've opened a few tickets and like the other person said, they tell me that they're working on it, to ignore it. But if there's something we can do to fix, I'm willing. I haven't gotten an actual answer of, maybe click here, check here. They just said ignore them. They're working on them. So
It's on our side right now.
yeah.
And it's something that, we know that it's on our side, and I believe that our communication out has stayed that way. If it hasn't, then I apologize, but we know that we have adjustments to make for both of those two, the zip code and for the parent guardian, to make sure that they don't over trigger.
Cliff, I did get one SIS that this might be useful for other SISs. I don't know if it works the same from SIS to SIS, but their feedback was that LEAs are seeing the warning, at least on the zip code, only when they have no separate mailing address information, but they do have the required physical address. If the mailing address is different and entered separately, but those LEAs who do have a separate, sorry, I'm trying to read this. If the mailing address is different and entered separately, there is no error from the state. But those LEAs who do have a separate, different mailing address are seeing the warnings. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I can send that out also if that helps some other LEAs.
Sure, and we can add that to the current ticket that we have to address this. And as I said, once we can get this prioritized, we'll certainly do so to get that cleaned up. Are there any other fields for discussion that anyone would like to bring up? Okay, go ahead to the next slide. All right, so yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. I believe I was going to take this over for Win, going over the retaliation data. So right off the bat, we've got our legal areas here covered with the Utah code, which is requesting for this, and that the law requires reporting on school disciplines and law enforcement actions. So it is pretty clear that that is needed for each LEA to provide and for us as a state to collect that information. So if that's not something that is already happening, then you'll probably need to address that with both your internal team and with your SIS to be able to make sure that that's available for you and that you're able to start entering that in. There's going to be more details coming through on this. Then we have what this means for an LEA. An individual who is subject to is the need to report victim data. Previously, the offender data being required, the victim data not explicitly required, has been updated to show what is needed here in 2023. And that's that the offender data required, victim data conditionally is required. If the infraction type is bullying, victim data is required. And there's, additional details there about what requires, to be submitted as bullying that you'll probably want to research in on your own to make sure you're educating everyone there to enter them in at those times. If the incident was a retaliation, and this is a new thing that is being added in, then the victim data is required. Go to the next screen. Again, further reference for you to be able to come back into and jump right to what's absolutely needed, what's in the state laws to be able to adhere to. Communication that you can also use for representing it out internally at your own LEAs. That retaliate means an act or communication intended a retribution against a person for reporting bullying or hazing, or to improperly influence the investigation of or the response to a report of bullying or hazing. So previously, we would get the incident report, but it wasn't really followed through if there was a follow-up incident. And there was a question of how that should be properly tracked. Hence, retaliation came in to help us identify when the bully continues to go after the event and retaliate. So more details there on your technical references. Go ahead to the next screen. For UTREX, we're adding a new field of retaliation. It's a similar field as what we have for the alleged basis, just a simple Y or N flag. And that is all we're looking for in that field. Any other values, again, wouldn't pass validations. A retaliation could be a variety of infraction types. And again, that is referenced in that earlier legislation document. We'll need to include these data in the school disciplinary and law enforcement actions report at the end of the 2023 school year. Seen in the chat, do we recommend that this be a checkbox and not an additional behavior type? I'm not sure about behavior type, but it's just, is this a retaliation, yes or no? So that's still essentially the same thing as your checkbox. It's just a Boolean value. It's true, it's false, but the characters that we need to see are Y or N. Does that help? Okay, thank you. Go ahead to the next slide. The new retaliation field, going in a little bit more of kind of what this is going to look like coming from UTREX. It's going to be coming through on the I-1 record, the incident one, the indicator of whether the incident was a retaliation or an alleged retaliation as defined, just with that Y and the N, as I just mentioned, a yes or a no. We've got some notes for trying to clarify and help with some frequently asked questions of if the I-2 record is for a student who was the offender, the role ID equals O for the offender, or B. Not sure what the or B was right off. Then report Y if the student stated there is evidence that the incident was a retaliation. So essentially just stating that you need to have a Y in there if it's the offender. I believe that the other option is the victim. Maybe that was a typo of whether or not it's the offender or the victim. I believe that was just a typo. So I apologize for that. Oh, both. Sorry.
The role IDs, the options are offender, victim, and both. So if they are both offender and victim, then that means they're the offender.
Great.
Yeah. So
thank you for that clarification.
Also, one of the things this slide where it says incident association record I-1, the incident association record is the I-2 record. So that's just a mistake there, just so everybody's aware. The retaliation field should be part of the I-2 record. It's information about the student involved in the incident rather than information about the incident itself. The I-1 record is about the incident itself. The I-2 records are about the students involved in the incident. So we need to know if the student is alleged to have done the incident as a retaliation or is the victim of a retaliation. So it's the I-2 record that this goes on.
Thank you for that clarification. The second one here of if the I-2 is for a student who was the victim, which would be the role ID of V, then again, report Y if the incident was known or alleged to be a retaliation. Go to the next slide. And on the technical end here, we've got the SIF mapping for the retaliation to where this is something that can be designed out for you on your side from this information. The retaliation field has not yet been applied out into our production environment yet. So there is still time for you as well to go out and build this as we are also in progress for building this out. And it's completely acceptable for you to send it prior to us. There's no breakage, there's no errors or warnings when we receive the additional fields, which we're not yet collecting. So you can be in place and ready to go as early as you are ready to do so. And this again will be referenceable from the spec. The Utrecht spec offers validation IDs and explanations for the retaliation validations. Right now we're looking at that it must be present for the I-2 record, and that it must be, either Y or N. So pretty simple validation. Go to the next screen. What USBE will expect to see for the bullying. To hit the exclusion first, when the offender or the victim is not a student, then we do not need to see that come through. This is involving when both people involved are students. When there is a case of bullying, the offender and victim data is required. When we see an incident record, the I-1, where one or more incident association records of I-2 is for the offender of the bullying, we expect to see one or more of the I-2 under the same I-1. And Leah just, shared that information with us just a moment ago. So hopefully that's clear for everyone. And go ahead, and then we have the B for both, which also explained. Then what USBE will expect to see for retaliation. Again, the exception being is when either of the offender or the victim is not a student, then you do not need to report it. You do need to report it when we see an incident record with the I-1, where one or more incident associations, the I-2s, is for the offender with retaliation of yes or Y. We expect to see one or more under the I-2 under the same I-1, so similar, and also similar with the B for both. Did you have a question?
No, but there was a question in the chat from Russell. What about situations where the victim would be an entire school? And then gives an example of, they posted a sign or whatever at the school campus.
No, that's a good question about when it turns into a group rather than an individual. I would say initially the key thing would be to document, and we can bring up that and determine whether or not it's an oddball occasion, that it just happens, say once a year, or if that's a common thing, then we may need to look at actually addressing it in our data and what's allowed and how that can actually reference a group rather than just an individual. So that'll be feedback that, we'll try to work with you on to best represent it both now and in the future.
And then a question, do these incident records besides the retaliation need to be in your SIS by the October 1st reporting?
The retaliation is the only new part, which again isn't being required yet. So initially I'm going to say that that's a yes, but I'm not up to speed on the legislation dates. So I'll let someone else try to speak in on that.
I believe the answer is no, they don't have to be. I mean, it's always good to report it as things happen because it's easier to collect the data as it occurs rather than all at year end. But it needs to be in there by year end. It doesn't affect anything for the October 1 submission.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead to the next slide. Here's another reference here for the new law enforcement fields, a reminder for the school year 2023, some of the legislation code for that and a link for it. And I believe that we're getting close to a handoff over for Wynn getting into the law enforcement screens here.
Sure, I can run through these. Thanks, Cliff. Appreciate that. Yeah, so just a few quick reminders on these new law enforcement fields. This is all stuff we've talked about, and I'm sure everyone knows about these things already. Next slide, please, Callista. But just a quick overview of these 5 fields. These are the fields and their definitions. We'll leave this here for you. This is also in the UTREC specs now. Next slide, please. So yeah, if you have questions about those, feel free to direct them to myself or Cliff. Thanks.
Okay, and then we have Malia presenting on the LEA student lookup role for special ed directors.
Okay, so over the years, we've been recommending special ed directors get set up with the special ed LEA user role, and realized that that role doesn't include, by default, permission to use student lookup. To go to the next slide. So sometimes the special ed directors need information about a student's prior enrollment records more quickly than they're able to get the records transferred. Or sometimes they're just having a hard time tracking down where they're supposed to get the records transferred from. And if they were able to use student lookup, and it would facilitate them getting the information they need in a timely manner. One example is a student who is coming from a private school, and the parent tells them the student's last school was a private school. What they omit is that the student was also receiving special ed services from their district of residence. And so that director doesn't know to reach out to the district of residence for the IEP record. If they had the student lookup functionality, they could do a quick search. They could see that, oh, the student had an IEP at the district of residence. They could request that record transfer. And then, or if they have a school where they've requested the record transfer, it's taking some time. In the meantime, they could look up that prior IEP record and get information on what services were being provided. This is a screenshot of what the default permissions are for the special education LEA user role. And you can see it does not include the student lookup functionality. It includes access to special education assessment comparison data, special education enrollment data, and then UTREX reports from December, the dropout event report from October, and the year-end Scrum extended school year and discipline, and then the year-round discipline incident summary report for special ed. Next slide. So basically, we're amending our recommendation, and we are now asking that all special ed directors get set up by default with 2 roles, the special education LEA user role and the student locator role. Okay, my next topic is my annual training this time of year about special education event dropout data. So students get identified as event dropouts for one of 2 reasons. Sorry, let me address this question real quick. Do we need to do that, or will it automatically happen? So I think this question is amending the roles assignment for your special ed directors. Do you need to do that, or will it automatically happen? You will need to do that. We can't do that for you. It's not appropriate for us to go in and change the roles. That it's your prerogative to assign roles. When I say you, I'm addressing the LEA data gateways, the LEA admins. It's your prerogative to assign roles to people within your district. So if you will, please go in and update your special ed directors so that they have both of those roles going forward. And then when we train new special ed directors going forward, we're going to have them approach you and ask you for both of those roles, as opposed to just the one role that we've previously recommended that they ask for. Okay. Okay, so back to special ed event dropouts. So basically there's 2 kind of buckets of how students get identified as dropouts. So one bucket is students who get identified as dropouts because their exit code or their high school completion status code is a dropout type. And that's going to be the code that comes off of the last enrollment record they had in the prior year. So for these students, current year enrollment does not change their dropout status. It's all about what that exit code or high school completion status code was last year. If the student has a high school completion status code, that's what we're going to use. Exit code is ignored. So high school completion status code trump exit code. If the high school completion status is blank, then we look at the exit code. If the, yeah, next slide. Okay, so students who are identified in the summer dropout bucket way of identifying dropouts, these are students who are identified as dropouts because they ended last school year in a way that we expect them to return to school, but they didn't. So they get treated as summer dropouts. So either the exit code and completion status code are both blank, which suggests they're not exiting, they're going to come back to school after the summer break. Or the code that was entered is one where we expect them to return back to school. Either they had the promoted code, or they had a transfer school or transfer district code. Those codes, or the lack thereof, creates the expectation that the student will return to school the next year. And if that student doesn't have an enrollment, and that's actually say school year 2023, with an entry date on or prior to October 1st and membership, then the student's going to be identified as a dropout, a summer dropout. Okay, and why is this important? This is high stakes for your LEA special education department. Actually, it's high stakes for the state. We are in a, I can't remember the term, needs improvement score from Office of Special Education Programs as a state. And we could get an easy win and get out of that status if we could improve our special ed graduation rate and dropout rate. This data, your event dropout data, is used for calculating Office of Special Education Programs Indicator 2, which is the rate of students exiting special education by dropping out. It's a component of the LEA's results-driven accountability risk score. Updating codes and tracking down summer dropouts can help improve data accuracy and helps ensure that no child is allowed to slip through the cracks due to enrollment tracking issues or outdated data. So if you need more information about Indicator 2, we have a webinar about that. This is the link. You'll be able to click on this link when you get a copy of this slideshow. Calista will be able to, we'll be emailing this out in a couple of days. And just to go off track real quick, Calista, Mark's asked a couple questions in the chat about incident data not being needed to be reported for October 1. Can you address that in the chat? Thank you. And next slide, please. Okay, so for the special ed event dropout, so we have some things we do on the USBE side to help clean up this data. First, in early September, the special ed data analyst, which is me, looks at the event dropout report, and I flag any LEAs that either have a large increase in your dropout count or dropout rate, or if you're one of the LEAs that doesn't have a grade 12, but you have special ed students who are age 7 through 21, if you have even one single dropout, your indicator 2 dropout rate is going to be 100%, because basically the only students, the way indicator 2 is, the only students, if you don't have a grade 12 who could be in your denominator, are dropouts. And so if you have any dropouts, you have 100% dropout rate. And that sucks. We want to give you a heads up about this so it doesn't slip through the cracks. And so you can try to do something about it. You can make sure that the data is accurate, see if there's a data update that's needed, or you can try to track down the student, find out if maybe you can do dropout recovery and get those summer dropouts to come back to school. So the next step after I pull that data, have identify some LEAs to be flagged. The special ed directors in those LEAs are contacted by the USBE transition specialist, Lavinia Griffin-Trog. And so she's already done that. She's reached out to all the directors in those LEAs that we flagged. And then in late September, when the data and statistics team starts doing the courtesy data reviews, they'll also be looking at the dropout numbers again, and they're going to include information in your review if your LEA is still flagged for one of those two reasons. Next slide, please. Okay, and then the LEA steps on this. So first of all, make sure your current year data is making it into UTREX and has membership. Second, make sure that the student's exit code and high school completion status code from the prior year is accurate. If not, and the student is enrolled in your LEA during the current historical update request to update the code, remember that the deadline to submit requests and have a guarantee that they'll be completed prior to the October 7 deadline for finalizing is September 23rd. So that's tomorrow. And then if the student is not enrolled in your LEA during the current year, you can update the prior year exit code or high school completion status code through submission of an S1X record. If the student is attending another LEA, make sure that that LEA is using the same SSID. If not, then you'll need to request the SSID merge. And you can also check to make sure that that LEA submission meets the requirements, which is that the student has to have membership and an entry date has to be on or before October 1st. And for more detailed information about event dropouts, about how to use that report, I have a PowerPoint that goes into a lot more detail. So just email me and I'll give a copy of that to you. Next slide. Okay, so one of my most frequently asked questions about the event dropout report is, my student dropped out last year, but came back to school this year. Why are they still showing up as a dropout? So this is that confusion that I kind of touched on earlier. These students are in the bucket that they got identified as an event dropout because of their exit code or their high school completion status code. For these students, whether or not the student returned to school the next year isn't a factor in determining their dropout rate. The next year enrollment is only a factor in determining dropout rates for students who exited in a way that we would expect them to return to school the next year. So as an example, if you had a student who dropped out in January, they got the DO exit code, even though they returned to school this year, which is fantastic, that's a win. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that they dropped out last school year. And so there's still going to be a dropout on your dropout report for last school year. The dropout exit codes, high school completion status codes that are dropouts are AE, it's transfer to adult ed, DO, dropout, EX is expelled, GE is exited to complete a GED, GP is graduation pending, UN is unknown, and WD is withdrawal. Next slide, please. Okay, my next most common frequently asked question about the event dropout report is, a student is showing up as a summer dropout, but I verified that they enrolled in another school. Why are they still showing up as a dropout? So the answer is, most likely there's a problem with the data being submitted by the other LEA. So the three most common problems: the enrollment record from the other LEA is being blocked by a fatal error, or the enrollment record has no membership, or the student was enrolled with a different SSID. And if you want to have some help with identifying exactly what's going on, feel free to reach out to me or to Data and Statistics. Next slide. Okay, and this annual thing we go through, reviewing the special ed data, it makes a difference. We've been doing this for a while now, and this is statistics over the years of the difference it makes of taking time to review and clean up the data. Before we started doing this, we had LEAs who would see their dropout rate and reach out to us and say, oh, that student's not a dropout. I didn't know they were going to get identified as a dropout, or else I would have updated the data. This special ed event dropout report is your tool for knowing which students are going to get identified as a dropout unless the data gets fixed. And the tool helps. We've decreased our dropout count between 37 and 52%. Just in a matter of a couple of weeks on average over the last couple of years. Okay, I think that's my last slide. Will you just double check for me? Okay, yeah. So I'm going to go into the questions because I think I saw a few questions come in for me. Okay, so I see a couple questions about incident data. Okay, and then S1X records. So Callista's going to go over submitting S1X records. So if you need more help, feel free to email. Okay. And then, okay, I think it's just a question from Stephen. As far as trying to improve our numbers as a state, do retained seniors count against us? They aren't required to be in school anymore, and oftentimes it's the parent's decision to withdraw them. So for the indicator 2 rate, so if they ended the 2022 school year with a high school completion status code of RT, retained senior, then that means we expect them to return to school this year. If they don't show up this year, then they would be counted as a summer dropout. And Stephen's point is very valid. They aren't required to be in school. It's a privilege, it's a right of theirs that they can return to school under FAPE until they're age 22, right, not a privilege, I used the wrong term. However, they also have the right to not return to school as a retained senior. So if it is a case where the student at the end of 1 year had planned on coming back this year, and then over the course of the summer, they decide, no, they're not going to do post-high, what you can do is submit an S1X record updating the high school completion status code, if applicable, to certificate of completion, if they did complete a certificate of completion, or of course if they graduated or graduated with the alternate diploma, those are also updates that you could do. All 3 of those changes would help improve your indicator 2 dropout, because they would no longer be identified as a summer dropout.
Malia?
Yes.
So this is Stephen. So I'm also looking at students who they weren't submitted as an RT at least their first submission as an RT wasn't last year. So they were like in the 2020 cohort or 2021 cohort. They've been attending, and then sometime during last school year, their parents just said, you know what, we're not doing this anymore, and withdrew them. They're showing up on the incident dropout rate as well. So similar. So what about them? Do they count against this? Because
yeah, so it's same answer really. Using the certificate of completion or the GA code isn't limited to the year in which they earned it. That's their final best status upon exiting, right? So if they earned the certificate of completion when they were originally a 12th grader, you can give them the CT code that year. They can return to school 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, up to 5 years. They can return to school all those years if they want. The CT code, even though they earned it in their 12th grade year, you could still report the CT code in the subsequent years that they return to school. The indicator 1 data is also affected by your choice of which of these codes you use. I don't think the CT and the GA code, they're not dropouts, but they're also not graduates in the indicator 1 data. RT, all 3 of those codes, are not graduates in the indicator 1 data. So those will go in the denominator of your indicator 1 data, but not in the numerator. So it won't help your indicator 1, but CT and GA will help your indicator 2, because they'll go in they'll go in the denominator for indicator 2, the dropout data, but they won't go in the numerator We actually, Lavinia has a big FAQ document about what to do in these situations, because it's not really a straightforward answer. So reach out to Lavinia or I, and we can send you a link to that document. Yeah, so did that answer make sense? Okay, and then Sarah's clarification. So if they earned a CT code, they can return to our school if they choose. Yes. So for students who have an IEP, receiving special education services, the CT code does not end eligibility for them to return to school. If it's a student who doesn't have an IEP plan, isn't receiving special ed services, the CT code is a permanent exit code, just like graduate codes. But for students with disabilities, the CT code is not won't trigger the permanent exit fatal error. The codes that trigger the permanent exit fatal error are GR, GQ, GM, GC, if the student died or aged out. So CT and GA, RT, RA, those high school completion status codes for students who are continuing in post-high, those are typically the codes you're using for students who are continuing in post-high. Okay, anything else you want me to clarify? Okay, I'll let Calista start her grad rate, and I'm going to try to get a link to that FAQ about graduation codes to use for your students continuing in post-high, and I'll put that in the chat.
All right, thanks, Malia. So David and I are going to be talking about graduation rate data specific to cohort 2022, because that's what we will be running after the October finalized data submission. We are getting a ton of questions from LEAs, so we decided to just do the thorough training again, although we are running short on time. So all of these slides will be sent out if we are going fast, or you can always reach out to me or David individually if you have specific questions. So David's going to be talking about the first part, and then I'll talk about doing updates with S1X and historical updates. So David.
Hello, everybody. So we have run the preliminary graduation rate for 2022, and we sent out 2 Excel spreadsheets, one with the completion status and one that's the graduation rate as it stands right now. We did make an update, however, to those files that we made a change that it should be accurate now. And another location where you can look at that if you don't see it in the Move It system is to go to the graduation rate preview report on the data gateway under your tools and see under the graduation section. And then you can also look at the graduation for 4-year report on the gateway as another source to see if see this information. Next slide. Okay, as stated previously, the deadline for updating this information is Friday, October 7th. Also, if there's 2 ways that you can make updates, S1X record updates or historical update requests. And the update deadline for historical updates is September 23rd by 5 p.m. Next slide. So the next few slides are going to be just a quick update. I won't go over them too thoroughly. Just this will be here for information. So this is what the graduation preview report looks like. It has basic information about each student. And then at the bottom, it'll also show counts for each type of outcome. So next slide. What you're looking for is checking their completion status and exit codes to make sure that they're complete and accurate. Every student in your file is for the 2022 cohort and is being counted to your LEA. If you find something that needs updating, you need to make sure that it's done in UTREX and not just in your SIS. Use the aggregated outcomes to check the number of your graduates, dropouts, and other completers, etc. This data will affect your grad rate, so make sure it's accurate. Next slide. The graduation rate is calculated based on the data that's entered into your SIS that's submitted to UTREX. At the end of a student's cohort year, a student is categorized as one of these outcomes, and a school's graduation rate is the number of graduates divided by the total number of students minus the students that are excluded based on their codes. Next slide. So how is a student assigned to a particular cohort? So the code looks at every record for students that are in 9th grade through 12th grade, and it'll look for the earliest record, and based off of that earliest record, the school year and the grade level, it will then set a cohort year. So if the first instance that is found of a record for a student is 10th grade, it'll use that to say, okay, the student should graduate in 3 years from, as it shows there on the slide, as an example. All right, next slide. So each student can only be included in one school's graduation rate. There are specific rules the state uses to determine which school is going to receive credit for that student. And here's a few examples for you to look at. Next slide. Okay, the link on the slide here is a really important reference for you to look at. This shows what the outcome for each type of completion status or exit code, what the outcome will be, and this shows how the calculation is determined. Okay. How to make updates. Updates from your SIS to UTREX can only be made for current year data. That means if the student's not enrolled, then you have to do the S1X update. If they are enrolled, it's a historical update for data that can, as it says there. All right, next slide. All right, these are some examples of codes that are going to turn into a dropout if they are not updated before the October 1 submission. There's a question in the chat. So if the data has been updated and showing update in the yearly cohort reports, then it'll be updated before our October submission. Yeah, if it's showing, yeah, that would be correct. If it's showing updated, then that would they should be good to go. Does the grad rate for 5-year report affect the school the same way the grad rate for 4 years does? I'm not sure what it's used for, other than we check students who are retained and see if they have a graduation rate or graduation change. And then it gets updated. If it's not changed, if there's no change to the student's outcome, then they would be considered a dropout in the 5-year rate. Okay. Next slide. These are codes that may become a dropout. So keep that in mind as you're updating. It's important to remember that the cohort dropouts and event dropouts are two different things. Here's the calculation for the graduation and dropout rates. Because other completers and continuing students are excluded from the dropout count, these two rates will not add up to 100%. And the event or single year dropout rate is how many students who started entering during the school year dropped out. And this rate is calculated by us at USBE, and the special ed event dropout report shows single year dropouts for those special ed students. Next slide. Here's a list for your reference of codes that will be excluded. And then you can also check the UZI report, which is available on the data gateway. Be sure to check that for those special ed students. And the contact information for any questions is down there at the bottom. You can contact UTREX for any the data gateway team for any technical issues and any questions about the report. Contact Adam Little.
All right. Thank you, David. I believe that was, yeah. And just one note, the UZI report is for adult ed
Right.
students. And so anyone that is exited to adult ed with the AE code or with the GE code to go take the GED, if those are not updated to show that they actually passed or graduated, those will count as a dropout. So the purpose of this report is to see if a student actually passed the GED or if they graduated from adult ed. And this is the only source of that information. So it is important. And then just to answer the question in the chat, this is what I will be talking about, but I can just answer that specifically. So if you have a student who transferred out of the country in 10th grade, how do I update the data? So it depends. If the student is gone, which based on your message, if they're no longer enrolled in your LEA in the current school year, you would need to do an S1X update, which is what I'll be talking about now. You can do that in your SIS. You do not need to submit a historical update for that. And you would just want to update that exit code to TO, which is TC, transfer out of the country. And then that will exclude the student when we run the graduation rate. So again, as David mentioned and Malia mentioned, the only way to update data in UTREX for prior years is through either putting in an S1X record update or through a historical update. And those are two different things. It sometimes confuses people because the word historical update implies that it's for a past year record, but a historical update and an S1X record update are two different methods of updating past year data, and they're not used interchangeably. There's certain circumstances that you should use a historical update and when you should not. And so the reason for that is UTREX is a dump and load system. So right now we are only accepting data in the current year, 2023. So once we rolled over in July, now you can't just go in your SIS and change an exit code. It might show up in your SIS as the correct code, but it never got through to UTREX. And so that's why we have these ways to update those records in UTREX. So some examples of past year data. We talked a lot about graduation data, but there's other circumstances that you might need to update past year data. So grade level inconsistencies, permanent exit errors, and then of course graduation, which is completion status codes and exit codes. Again, there's two ways to do it, the S1X or the historical update, and there are certain circumstances for which each should be used. So generally S1X records can update exit codes and completion status codes from the prior school year, and they're submitted through your SIS. This is a lot easier than a historical update because a historical update is manual and requires a process. So we try to only use those when we have to. The main distinguishing question to ask yourself if I should submit a historical update when doing graduation data is if the student is currently enrolled with you. If you're trying to update an exit date, or sorry, exit code or a high school completion status code, and the student is not enrolled with you this year, you can do it in your SIS. So basically, the way it gets its name, S1X, is because it's an S1 record submitted in the current year, but the X is put on the resident status. So you can see in this example, if a student finished last year with a TS code and you know that I need to change that to transfer to homeschool, you're going to submit a current year record in this school year. You're going to exit the student after 1 to 2 days, no membership, make sure that you have X on resident status and put in the correct code. So here's another example on that. So it should be submitted with the resident status marked as X. If that is not marked, then no update will be made. The X is what distinguishes in UTREX that this is an update and not a current year code. So again, the way to check that is if you look at the record either in your examine file, what you're submitting to UTREX, or you can put the SSID in the student lookup function and make sure that on the record you're submitting for this year that resident status is marked as X. Again, this cannot be used for students who are currently enrolled in your LEA, and that's because you can't submit two enrollment records. I think somebody's sound is not muted. Okay. And then S1X records should not be submitted with any of the other records. So only the S1. So again, how to do these. The student must not be currently enrolled with you. So in 2023, they should not be enrolled in your LEA. It's okay if they're enrolled somewhere else. They just can't be enrolled in your LEA. Then you would create an enrollment record as you would normally for any other student that's enrolled in this school year. Again, you want to mark X as the resident status. That might vary across SIS systems. I think in Aspire, it's like EX, but it basically denotes that it's a change record. And then you're going to exit the student after 1 to 2 days, set the membership to 0. And then most importantly, you want to make sure you put in the updated codes that you're trying to update. So if you're updating the exit code, then you would want to put in the correct exit code. If the correct exit code or completion status code is blank, then you would just leave those blank. Okay, again, this shows some variation across SIS systems. So I believe this is an Aspire. It shows the X, but it calls it ES change record. And that means that it's to do an update. It's an S1X. And again, this is on the resident status field. Nice. Okay. So that's for S1X. When an S1X record update cannot be used, the only other way to update the data in UTREX for prior years through a historical update. Examples of this might include prior year exit in high school completion status code for students who are currently enrolled in your LEA. Incorrect grade levels submitted in a prior year. Level 2 fatal error exception requests for students whose prior year grade level is correct and is more than 2 grades lower or higher than the current grade level. Corrections to cohort years due to extenuating circumstances, legal name and gender changes. So in other words, it was changed on the birth certificate. These are all examples of things that a historical update should be used for, but in general, we don't see these a lot. So these are to be used with discretion. If it's the only way, then you have to do it, but we don't expect to see hundreds of these. Again, the historical update process requires both our team, data and statistics, and IT to go through a very manual process. And so it's not an instantaneous thing. You have to do a request through the data gateway. There's a form on your UTREX dropdown. Then you click new request. You're going to have to fill out all this information. It's especially important to fill out when it affects multiple LEAs. And the more information you can put, the better, because that helps us when we go through these one by one and have to approve them or decline them. And then once we approve it, that doesn't mean that the update it's done. Then at that point, we have to send a script to IT and they have to make the changes on that student in the database. So a lot of times these can take quite a bit of time. That's why we do have a deadline set 2 weeks prior to the submission. This is a mistake where it says today. The deadline is actually tomorrow. This is the correct date. This is 2 weeks prior to October 7th. So that's when these are due. And we do guarantee if you get it in by tomorrow that we'll have them done prior to when you need to finalize. If you send them in after tomorrow, we just can't guarantee that they'll be done. You will receive an email once the request has been reviewed and whether it's approved or denied. And remember, just because it's approved doesn't mean that it's actually completed. Once it's completed, you'll want to wait to resubmit if you're close to finalizing to make sure that the change actually went through. And I can say that if you've put in a request up until today, those have all been approved or declined and a ticket has been put in with IT. So those should be completed by next week. So that's just to give those LEAs who are waiting on some of those updates an idea of when you can expect those. Okay, again, if you have questions about anything related to updating graduation data or about graduation rates, you can contact myself or David. And I have not seen questions in the chat about this, but I think Malia's been responding. Okay, we have one last item, and I know that we're over time, but this is an important one, so I'll try to go fast. Sorry, my fingers hit the keys. Okay, so the last item on our agenda today is the October 1 submission training for school year 2023. Again, the deadline for that is coming up in a couple weeks. It is Friday, October 7th, so that's 2 weeks from tomorrow at 5 p.m. The finalizer is scheduled to be turned on September 30th, which is a Friday, so that gives you about 1 week to get your data finalized. You can finalize before October 1st, so on the 30th, as long as you don't have any changes in enrollment between the 30th and October 1st. Otherwise, you would just need to refinalize. The submission is for data as of October 1st. So it really doesn't matter what day of the week October 1st falls on. It matters what the entry and exit dates are on the enrollment records. So as long as the student was entered on or before October 1st and they were not exited or exited prior to October 1st, then they would make it into your count. So hopefully that makes sense. And then in the board rule, we do have a paragraph that talks about the window for extension. This year, because the date falls on a weekend, the extension kind of drop dead date is Monday, October 17th. There's a very specific process that you would need to follow if you apply for an extension. So that's something that you can contact me individually if you're getting down to the wire and you're going to require that. This again is a very rare thing. And it's only in the event of very extreme circumstances that you cannot submit. All right, so after your October 1 data is finalized, it's not like year end, what we just finished. You do not need to cancel your submissions. So even after you finalize, you don't need to turn anything off. You can just keep your submissions going as normal. Future submissions will not overwrite your finalized data unless you press the finalize button again. And please remember to download all October reports from the data gateway immediately after finalizing. The reason for that is because the archived reports function is often not made available till at least a few weeks after the deadline, and sometimes LEAs need those counts and reports for auditors sooner than those archived reports are available. The other reason we ask you to download them immediately is because as soon as you resubmit a new collection, those numbers may change. And so it's best to just download those reports as soon as you know you're going to hit that finalize button. So we do a courtesy data review for every LEA at each of the 3 submission periods. So for October, we will review the following items. These are mostly items that are related to funding and to other very important reporting categories. So the first item is district of residence errors, Sshd warnings, total enrollment counts, count of foreign exchange students, economically disadvantaged or free and reduced lunch indicators, English learner counts, cohort graduation data, cohort reassignment for students on path to an alternate diploma, and then special ed event dropout data. As always, at any submission, it's always a good idea to review all errors and warnings and clear what's possible. Sometimes there's situations where you review a warning or an error and acknowledge that there's nothing you can do about that, or you're choosing to not fix that for some reason. And that's fine, but generally, please just review them so you know what you're submitting. It's especially important to pay attention to fatal errors that are going to block student records. And in October, that's important because if a student record is blocked, they're not going to make it into your October 1 count. And that count is what funding is based off of. So some errors that might be blocking student enrollment records from getting into UTREX are, and that need to be cleared, are all level 2 fatal errors. So permanent exit errors, student grade level inconsistency errors, dual scram errors, and dual kindergarten fatal errors. On the kindergarten ones, we just ask that you work with the other LEA and the students' parents to decide which LEA should keep the student and which LEA should unenroll the student. To clear the error, the overlap in kindergarten records needs to be less than 20 days. Level 1 errors to pay particular attention to are on the student, so the S1 record, the student list, and then the school and district record. If the school and district record are being blocked, then that's going to affect everything under that, so all the students. Level 1 fatal errors on course records will have to be fixed if they result in the following. The student has more than 10 days of total membership. Then the student must have at least one course record with membership greater than 0. So please make sure and clear those. All other warnings and errors should still be reviewed. If you have valid address or district of residence warnings, you can contact Sam at USBE. It used to be Kieran, but Kieran actually switched to a different position. So for those of you that are used to calling her, please contact Sam this year and he can help you clear those. SSID warnings are important to review in October because of all the things that are hinging on, like graduation reporting and the single year dropouts. If there are students that need to be merged, SSID merges need to be put in early, well before the finalized deadline. So please review all SSID warnings carefully to make sure that students are not sharing an SSID or that there's not duplicates. Okay, so these are the items that we will put in the courtesy data review for October 1. So we look at total enrollment counts. This is really important, this following list. If you're looking at your SIS, we often get this question and your count is not lining up with what you're seeing in the school summary report or what we're reviewing, what we're putting in your review letter. Often it's because your SIS count, some of the students don't meet all the following criteria. So the October 1 count is not necessarily every student that's enrolled with you. They have to meet the following criteria. They have to be in grades K through 12, have at least 1 day of membership, are a Utah resident, have an active enrollment record as of October 1, and school of record is not no. These counts, again, are important because they do determine funding. There's questions. So who do we ask about help for the SSID warnings and how do we fix SSID duplicates? So I believe on the new help desk system, there should be you can just put in a general ticket to the help desk and it will get directed to the right team. But I thought there was a specific drop down for SSID. If not, just put in a ticket and it will get directed to, but I don't know if Paula's on this call. She was helping another LEA and there was a specific form they needed to fill out for that, but a ticket will need to basically be put in for that.
Yes, and like you said, if you just put in a ticket, it will get directed towards the right help, but SSID is a drop down.
Yeah. And then another, thank you, Paula. Another LEA is how do we deal with the fatals if they're the subject of a UTRIX ticket? So that you'll have to work hand in hand with Cliff and his team. If that's something on the USBE side, if it's something on your SIS side, again, we'll just want to keep in close contact up until that deadline. And then if it's determined that it's not cleared, by the day that you need to finalize, we'll address if an extension needs to be granted.
On that one, been notified that it's on the JIRA list and of backlog. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it doesn't sound like it's promising.
Okay, if you send me an email with the ticket, or just give me some kind of general information so I can look at the ticket, I can make sure that that gets put on IT's radar.
Okay, thank you.
Anything related to the October submission needs to be a priority right now. So if you have a ticket that's not being addressed, please just let me know.
Thank you.
Okay, you'll want to make sure that your school counts are correct for the new school year. This is always better to catch and fix now at the beginning of the school year rather than at year end. So please check on your school summary report that you're seeing all schools in there. This is important because these reports are used for auditing and funding purposes. We will also review other demographic counts. In general, what we look for is what was submitted in the prior year, October, and compare it to what's submitted in the current year in UTREX. We look at English learner counts, economically disadvantaged counts. On that one, I will say, because some things are changing for LEAs that report CEP and Provision 2 school data, we will take that into account if there's a big change, knowing that we're asking you to change how you're reporting that. So we'll try and, I have a list of all those schools and LEAs, so we will try not to flag you. But if for some reason it gets flagged, just know that it doesn't mean it's wrong in that situation. Okay. We will also look at your foreign exchange student counts. We check how many students are being reported with the J resident status code and compare it to what's expected, the allocations that were given by the state. And this is important for WPU funding for foreign exchange students. If you want more information regarding that, there is a link that will be provided in the slides. Okay, Malia covered this pretty well, but we will also look at this data in the courtesy data review, the special ed event dropouts. This is important because these students will be reported to OSEP as special ed dropouts for indicator 2. We will look at big changes from the prior year. There is a specific report for this that you can look at on Data Gateway. And those do need to be, any updates to fix any of those that need to be updated need to be done by your October's finalized submission. We also have started to look at is 1% data now. That way by December, LEAs have more time to get that entered correctly. So please make sure that is 1% data is being reported correctly. We will look if no students are reported with the is 1% when there was a count that you had reported last year. We will also look if there's a big change in the is 1% count comparing to last year. And again, this is in preparation for December because this is a critical data point for special ed funding. Cohort graduation, we went over pretty in depth, but again, this is really important to get all graduation data updated, and whatever you finalize in October is what we run in the final grad rate. So anything from year end needs to be updated by your October finalized submission. And I will just make a note that S1X record updates need to be continually submitted depending on how your SIS works up until the day that you actually finalize. So just because you sent it in once when you made the update doesn't mean that it's continuing to be sent to UTREX. So please make sure that all those updates are still sent on the day that you actually finalize. Okay, and then cohort reassignment. This doesn't apply to all LEAs, but those LEAs that have students on path to receive their alternate diploma, we just check how many RA codes you're reporting and compare that with how many RA codes were reported last year and the year prior. And we'll look if students that were given the RA code at year end in 2021 that didn't have the RA code again last year in 2022, and we will mark that if that applies to you. We'll also look, the reason that we look at this is because students coded with RA have a reassigned cohort. So their cohort is actually moved a year. So for students that were given the RA code in 2022, they'll actually be put in cohort 2023. So it's important to get that right because RA and RT will have a different graduation outcome. RA can count as a graduate in their adjusted cohort, and RT will count as an other completer. Requirements to use the RA code: the student must be is 1% and on path to receive the alternate diploma. And if you have questions about that, you can ask Malia or myself. Okay, these next items are things that we wouldn't consider like top funding items. They still should be reviewed and looked at and corrected if necessary, but you don't need to respond to us about them. So charters need to make sure that they're reporting students with the right resident status codes. The C code should only be used by students' district of residence. The B code should not be used for students in charters. And there's some notes on that in the UTREC specs, or you can ask us if you have questions on that. We also will look at students that are reported with resident status as A and F. It doesn't mean that that's incorrect. We just want to make sure that you're aware, though, of how many you're reporting, because those aren't included in funding calculations. So if those resident statuses A and F are reported incorrectly, then that would be at the cost of some of the funding an LEA is entitled to. And then for LEAs with graduation rate and event dropout rate data, we just check that, or ask you to check that you're reporting your S1X records correctly. So we'll just give you on your courtesy data review a total number that we're actually receiving at the day that we review your letter. All right, these are just some examples of things that you might see on your letter. We highly recommend that you use the examine file as you're reviewing your data, getting closer to finalize. The examine file is found on the UTREC's overview screen. There's a file icon on the left under your level 1 errors and warnings. You can download it. It's an Excel spreadsheet with multiple tabs for the different records. And you can filter on a tab to check what data is making it from your SAS into UTRECs. And so that's really useful to see if certain records are actually making it. There's an is valid column on the far right. And if that is valid column, doesn't have a 1, then you might want to check what's going on. All right, this is instruction on how to download your October reports. So I'll just send this out with the slides afterwards. But one note on this, the reports often have 2 file icons. One is a PDF and one is a CSV. The PDF is what we will send to you, so it will have your school summary report information, but the PDF is aggregates. And so it's often really useful for you to download the CSV version of that same report, because it will show you all the students and not just the aggregate counts, but you can actually start digging into the student level data. So oftentimes when we get questions, that's where we'll look first, is at the student level version of the October reports. And again, please download those after you finalize. Okay, this is just showing you where you can get to your October reports. So you go to UTRECs, then reports, and then it's at the very top. Everything under October reports needs to be downloaded, and it looks like there's 5. So please make sure that you download those. And then this shows you where some reports are to view counts under October, all of those, and then on your student summary under year-round reports on the right. Okay, so we're getting towards the end here, almost done. So we will send out a courtesy data review to every LEA, whether you request it or not. If you do send me an email saying I need this sooner, we'll just put you at the top of the list. But we start doing the reviews tomorrow, and we'll keep working on those through all of next week. Again, if you need it, sooner for some reason, please email me or the data statistics help email. You can also request additional reviews after the first one if you would like more eyes on your data. The purpose is to help you improve data accuracy, receive correct funding, and to ensure an on-time finalization. But as a reminder, we're here to assist you in reviewing your data. So please don't rely solely on the courtesy data review as the only source of review. You know your data better than anyone else. So that's meant to help you, not to be the sole source of review. You also don't need our permission to finalize. You can finalize when you are ready. We do ask that you at least review the courtesy data review before you finalize. But you can finalize at any point, and you can refinalize as long as you do a new submission. Up until the deadline, you can refinalize as many times as you need. Please don't wait until the last day and minute to finalize. We understand that some LEAs are having major SIS problems or need to wait to the last minute. But for everyone that can finalize early, we ask that you do that just because there's always issues on the last day, and it just helps everyone if we're not bogging the system down. Make sure that your data collection has completed before selecting the finalize button. If it says data not yet submitted, you can't press the finalize button. It needs to say processed or completed. Also, once you press the finalize button, the actual submission box on the bottom needs to show a completed status with no errors. If it shows an error in the actual finalize, that means you will need to redo it. So please don't just press it and walk away. Make sure that it actually goes through. And then download your reports. If you need help, please feel free to contact us. You can put in a ticket if it's related to UTREC's technical issues. If you're having an issue with your SIS, you know where to go. Contact your SIS help. And then if you have questions about your data, the courtesy data review, graduation data, you can contact data and statistics at our main email, or you can reach out to us individually. And that's all I have. And I apologize we went so far over, but for those that stuck with us, we appreciate you. And do we have any last questions?
I have one question. I know I threw this out there a little bit ago on kindergarten. Can you just tell me what's the latest and greatest on the kindergarten? My understanding is the default is NN for the half day, and then if they go extended day, then it's the EN, and full day is the FN. Is there any academic piece that goes along with that also?
So it depends on your SIS when you say default, but they should be coded according to how they are attending. So if they're attending half day, then they should be coded as NN. And some SISs do default everyone to NN. So we just ask that you check that if your SIS does default everyone to NN, that you check that students who are attending full day or extended day, that they are coded accordingly. Does that answer?
So at one point in time, I thought I heard that there was an academic piece. If they qualified for like an OEK from previous years or whatnot, then it would be the extended day. Is that academic piece still in play?
So there, at year end, we do review LEAs that are receiving OEK funding. And if you have reported everyone as half day, then we will mark that, because if you're receiving funding to provide extended or full day kindergarten, you should be reporting at least some students that way. That's the only thing that I know of related to that. I don't know if Malia knows of anything else.
I don't remember the details off of the top of my head, but there was a legislative change this year to kindergarten funding. And I think that the legislative change wasn't everything that USDE was hoping for. And so we're going to be pursuing additional changes in the year to come. So this is probably an item that needs to just be covered in more detail after doing more research on the latest information about it, and just cover it, put it on the agenda for next meeting, if that's okay to wait till next month, Brad.
Well, yeah, that's fine. I just wondered, does it have to be updated by October 1, everything?
Nothing uses the kindergarten type in October. The kindergarten type data comes from year end.
Oh, okay, so, okay, there's a little bit of time. I was just wondering with the October 1 coming up, if all that had to be finalized or whatnot. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thanks.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, this is Russell. Is there any funding implications based on immigrants and refugees for October 1 data?
Not that I know of. I don't know if anyone else has any insight on that, but that's not ever been an item that our team has reviewed or provided reporting on, but I can follow up with the section in USBE that deals with immigrants and refugees, but as far as I know, we don't have anything related to funding on those counts.
Okay, thank you. If you could do that for me, I'd appreciate it.
I will, yes.
Callista, also check with finance to see if they have any line item spending amounts that are allocated based on immigrant and refugee count.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. All right, well, if there's no other questions, all these slides and notes will be sent out, as well as a recording for everyone. And we can go ahead and end if there's no other questions. Thank you, everyone.